Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Nextworks Inspiration Talk today. I have an interview with Shayamal Vallabhjee. I'm not at all sure whether I pronounced that right, and I'll let him pronounce that himself, because he joined and welcomed us in India, a place he's been living in for 14 years. So he kind of knows the place even better than or definitely better than I do. I had never been there myself personally. So I'm excited. We're about to find out why the place India is so inspiring for individuals, but also for leaders, for businesses today. My name is Julie Van de Vos, and at Nextworks, we believe it's crucial that companies spend 10% of their time in exploring other places, in exploring the longer-term future, and hence sense a bit what's happening in the world besides their own world today. So what can we learn from other countries in Europe, in the West and in the East? Definitely a topic for today. As you know, we've been places from London, Dubai, to the West, New York, Silicon Valley, but also China and India is definitely on our radar since last year. My guest today has a massive experience, not only with the country, but also in talent and leadership. So I'm eager to find out what his opinion about the country and about leadership today is. So welcome again, Shayamal. Really pleased to have you, and thanks for making the time. For the ones looking and listening, could you maybe shortly introduce yourself a bit and highlight your context and history?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Judy, for having me. I obviously got introduced to Nextworks because we did a wonderful event in Mumbai towards the end of last year. It was really eye-opening. For everyone who's listening, I am a performance coach. Academically, I graduated as a sports scientist, and I'm a clinical psychologist as well. And I have worked in the era of performance predominantly with athletes and CEOs. I am South African, but I moved to India in 2007 when I was called upon to train the Beijing Olympic team, the Indian contingent that was going to Beijing. And then I stayed on there for well over a decade, almost 14 years. I trained 3 different Olympic teams that went across to Beijing. I set up a company, grew it to a multi-million-dollar company and exited it in India. And I had the wonderful opportunity to sort of interact with people at literally every single industry and every strata of society. Coming from South Africa, I grew up in the apartheid environment, which was a real interesting experience, but something that has been the foundation of my teachings as a performance coach. And what makes India so interesting was that the link for me was really deep. When I was suffering with a little bit of mental anxiety due to the apartheid, I took a little sabbatical and I moved into a temple and I became a monk for almost 4 years. And that spiritual connection in South Africa was the spiritual connection that I leveraged in India, that is deep within the soul of every single person. It's in the water, it's in the food, it's in the language, you see it in there. And that was the connection that really helped me forge strong bonds, tap into a value system that's innate in everyone to really grow. So as a performance coach, I look at the body, I look at the mind, I work with CEOs, I work with high performance teams in the business and in the sporting ecosystem. But right at the foundation of everything, I'm looking at values and I'm looking at spirituality. And if people ask me to sum it up, I tell people my job as a coach is to take you on the longest journey you will ever embark on your life, the journey from your head to your heart.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thanks for that, and congratulations. There was a lot of things in there that are just inspiring as such already, I would say. And maybe on the sidetrack, what struck me was the connection to a place. I think that resonates with our work at Nextworks as well, where we really believe taking people into a context, into an experience where they have freedom to think about that heart, I would say, is really, really important. And you're South African, you have that connection with India, you're in Europe these days as well. How do you relate to the importance of a place in your experience? How important is it to work with that?
I think a place is everything, but deeper than a place is the values and the culture within that. That's actually what you resonate with. When I describe things, I talk of, great athletes want to become legends, and a legend is built over 10 years. Great companies want to last, maybe 100 years. They want to become a billionaire, but you can't really be thinking about those. Those are two macro blocks. The granular blocks of everything is actually values, and values sort of transform or transmute into everything you do, into the food you eat, into how you communicate, into how you serve, into how you do everything. The way I describe it is values, and the way you express it is what gives voice to the voiceless, and how that comes across. And for me, when you start connecting these invisible threads that are the values, you start building culture. And culture is what connects, truly. So for me, whenever you get into a new place, in South Africa, it was my Indian roots and my spiritual connection that I leveraged in India. But the world has really moved to a very, very beautiful place now, Judy. 20 years ago, people weren't talking so much about the heart. They weren't talking about empathy. They weren't talking about vulnerability. So I had to leverage what were external things. I'm a Hindu, I'm an Indian, I follow this spiritual master. Those were the external things. We've now moved to such a beautiful place in the world where religion doesn't matter. The place you are doesn't matter. It's the authenticity, it's the vulnerability, it's the willingness to forgive, it's the willingness to express empathetically, be compassionate, the things that are present in every single one of us that now becomes the invisible threads that connect us together. So in one shape and form, how I moved to India was because of spirituality, that I helped leverage it. But where we are today in the world is a fundamentally stronger place than we've ever been, because what connects us is now no more fragmented by religion and culture and language. It's now deeper than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very powerful what you're saying, and it's good indeed. And maybe some of these things are pretty universal also, hence why going to different places sometimes help in focusing and refocusing on those values, on those core things that drive you and move you and get you a little bit out of your today box, I would say.
Absolutely.
The second thing in your introduction that was also, and then also in just your profile, is very clear you work with high intensity teams, but also high performance teams, but also definitely high intensity sport teams. So the link and the line between athletes and business leaders, CEOs, I think a lot of people already recognize that, but could you maybe elaborate a bit on how you see that, how you got into that connection, that comparison? We work a lot with people working in sports, from hockey coach Shane McLeod, or you have Mark Gallagher from Formula One. So there must be something in that sports scene and that performance era that does trigger something. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a lot that's common, which makes it so easy for people like myself to transition. And I think for those of you listening, there's a beautiful book called The $1 Trillion Coach, which speaks of a coach by the name of Bill Campbell from Stanford. He was in Silicon Valley. And for the longest time, he was the personal coach to Eric Schmidt and to Steve Jobs and to all of the big CEOs that came out of the Valley. And really and truly, he had no business experience. He came from 3 to 4 decades of pure sports experience. Now, what is it that allowed a sportsman to be able to coach some of the biggest CEOs? Was not really his understanding of the industry, but his understanding of certain key components that drive performance. And I'm going to break that down for you. But before I do that, I want to say, in the world of professional sport, competition is paramount, which means that because it's a pure meritocracy, when we start, there's always going to always be one winner, right? Mm-hmm. You can celebrate that in different ways, but there's always going to be one winner. So in sport, competition is the fabric of everything. But in business, it doesn't have to be like that. In business, you're in a stronger position. You're in a position of collaboration. In sport, 1 and 1 come together and there's only one person standing. In sport, 1 + 1, in business, 1 + 1 can equal 5. And that's the power that business has. Now, the question is, how do we leverage the ethos, the value system from sport to be able to make sure that 1 + 1 = 5? Well, in my experience, in 20 years of working with these people, I found that the three things that are really needed to be able to succeed and thrive, the commonalities between good business leaders and great athletes. The first one is competence, right? Your competence is non-negotiable. You have to have your academic knowledge, you have to do your research, you have to have done the hard yards, maybe have good mentors in there. All of the knowledge base gives you competence, right? That's where you get it. So competence is non-negotiable. The second thing that's non-negotiable to succeed is confidence. Now, competence is in abundance, truly. Everyone is competent to some degree. Confidence is a little bit of a differentiator. Now, why is confidence the differentiator? Because confidence is built on the back of hard work, which means you need to show up and you need to do the work. And most people are not prepared to show up. So if you have confidence and if you've done the work, then you're 90% better than everyone else. But you're still sitting in a pool of 10% of people who are as confident and as competent. And the truth is, how do you rise right to the top of that? And there's one more factor. And that factor is composure, stillness, the ability to remain calm in a high pressure situation. Now, what is a high pressure situation? A high pressure situation is a situation when the margin for error is minuscule and the penalty for failure is high. That is when you want to shine. Why do you want to shine there? Because that is when everyone is taking notice. Okay. The only thing that's going to allow you to shine in there is composure. Why? Because when you're still and calm, neuroscience tells us the mind is open. So all of the knowledge, all of your experience, everything you've learned in your entire life can come in to help you navigate that moment. If you're stressed in that moment, your brain shuts down, the window closes, and all you're thinking is survival. The greatest people at the pinnacle of pressure are not thinking survival. They're thinking, how can I leverage this opportunity? They are thinking that pressure is a privilege. So how am I going to level this? So the fine line that threads great business leaders and great athletes is competence, confidence, and composure.
I think that's something everybody in any job can relate to. So that's definitely a powerful line and metaphor, I think, as well. And they both exist, of course. So it's not just a metaphor, I would say. And one of your concepts, I would say, or the things you work with in both these target groups is the learning cycle. Could you share a bit what you mean with that?
Actually, the learning cycle exists for every single one of us. It's just a little bit more prolific and in our face in the world of sport. And what the learning cycle is, so before I even go there, I was reading a Harvard research study which said something interesting, and you're a CEO as well, so this applies to you. It said that 80% of CEOs are happy with their strategic planning. Less than 30% of them are happy with the execution of that plan. Okay, now this gap is massive, that 50% gap between strategy and execution. And that is in fundamentally the essence of sport, is closing the gap between strategy and execution. Now, why are we practicing every day? To sort of minimize that gap. Now, the learning model that I speak about is a model to close that gap. Now, the model is very simple. It has 4 components to it. We say we practice or we compete. Then we reflect on that competition or that what we've done. We analyze that reflection, the win or the loss. We analyze the strengths and weaknesses. We take that back in to practice, and then we compete again. Mm-hmm. So you've got a practice and a play component, which is the execution component. And you got the reflect and the analyze, which is the strategic component, the strategy component. Now, for learning to truly happen, both pieces of the pie have to come together. Right? The person who's making the mistake has to be given the opportunity to reflect and analyze on what they did wrong and go back and re-practice for the learning circle to be complete. This is why athletes get better so quickly. This is why while a company could be growing at 10% or 15%, an athlete could literally overnight, in a month, completely transform his entire game because the learning cycle is complete. In the world of business, you have strategists and innovators and visionaries who are doing all of the thinking, and the people who are doing all of the execution are making the mistakes. And these two are not talking to each other. And this group is not getting the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. And the group on the top is not understanding what that mistake was and where the gap in that mistake was. So you fragmented these two pieces. Now, in the world of sport, there's something really interesting, is we embrace diversity. And for me, diversity is the foundation of leadership, embracing diversity. Now, we're sitting in a locker room, and Julie, in a locker room, I've got people of different cultures, completely different skill sets, different languages, all have to come together in a set time and execute the exact same goal. In business, it's not like that. In business, the people who are thinking are in the boardroom, the people who are doing on the floor. And the floor people never get invited to the boardroom, and the boardroom rarely goes onto the floor. And the problem is that we don't embrace diversity. Psychologically, we draw comfort from familiarity, which is how the brain is. Which means if you're an analytical thinker, you want to spend time having coffee with an analytical thinker because a doer just doesn't impress you. You get bored with it, So what happens is that in the world of business, if you're not careful, the brain, in the way it functions, forces you down a line where the learning channel or the learning circle is completely fragmented in half. We don't have that in sport. We are constantly bringing it together, and we work towards bringing it together. The strategy and the execution. And that's how we're able to close the gap a lot quicker.
Yeah, nice. I was thinking to what extent that strategy versus execution gap, do you see differences in India compared to the rest of the world?
Yes, we see these differences in India. They're massively there, and the gap exists at different levels at different parts of organization. But India, for example, recently, a year ago, had its 101st unicorn. Okay, $1 billion company. So in India, we have more unicorns in India than anywhere else in the world. Okay. We have 22,000 startups. Now, why is it that the gap between strategy and execution, how are we able to produce that many? The gap is really, really small at the top level. Now, where the gap is much bigger is in government, where you get people, or in the army, or in certain services that is more governmentally deployed. We're finding there's a bigger gap there. But that gap's been closed, and it's been closing very, very quickly with the advent of technology. And India is really at the forefront of a new phenomenal technology wave. So yes, certain bigger gaps exist at the bottom. The gap is much smaller at the top, which is why the turnaround of growth is so much better. That's why the economy is bludgeoning. But even that gap at the bottom is going to be closed quite significantly because of technology.
Amazing times to come for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe on India or a little bit further down that line, but you mentioned it a little bit in the beginning, like how you've lost your heart and soul, I guess, there. And maybe you could elaborate on what brought you back. I think you sort of hinted on that already, but could you give us your pitch on India? Like, if you have an audience that doesn't know a lot about the country besides the general news, what would your pitch be? Like, why is India so fascinating? And I think one being that wave they're close to as well. But what's your take on India and where it's now?
The thing about India that's really, really beautiful, if you look at the companies, yes, we have 101 unicorns that have done really well. But who were the original unicorns of India? Those were the companies like Tata's, the Mahindras, the Birlas, much like AVH, a legacy company built by a family 100 years old. Now, why do I love it? It's because there's a word called seva, S-E-W-A. Seva means service. Seva is in it's in the blood of every single Indian. Even if a person doesn't have something, they'll share whatever little they have. And that's what makes India beautiful. These unicorns that are built on the fabric of not building great businesses, but building great societies. Right? That's what makes India amazing. When you look at the US, where they're trying to build great companies, and you look at China, where they're trying to make the government stronger, India sits in the middle of two massive economies, but it's invested in building great societies. The businesses give back. And it's not just in a statement or in a mission statement. It's built into the DNA of the company. I explained Unilever in India gives 25% of every single cent it earns back into a community. It's mandated. It's in their law. Tata Steel gives 60% to a trust fund that looks after everyone. And because when you build communities at the center of your business, trust is so strong that the people don't let that business fail. And that's the beautiful thing about India. This is why India will always go through ups and downs, but India will always rise. Because at the end of the day, the strength that's holding that organization up is not the 1,000 or 10,000 employees in there. It's the strength of the entire community whom they give back to. The community is invested in keeping that up, not just the people in that organization. And that's one of the most beautiful things about India. You see that service, you see that value come through in every single shape and form.
Yeah, it resonates to me. It makes me think of we've been a lot of on programs in China as well. Of course, a couple of years ago, and I remember somebody saying there, the West has run out of problems to have. So you guys don't want to generalize, but it was more like, as you mentioned, I love that concept of we're building society because there is no other way. These are the radical questions that we're facing. So indeed, does it resonate? Is it that way that you sort of mean that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We have to build societies. That's the only way India is growing forward. And if you look at it, what is India's biggest strength? We don't have the technological competence of making chips like a China. We don't have the finance that's coming in at a startup level like what's happening in the Silicon Valley. Our biggest strength is our workforce, and our workforce is our people. Now, how are you going to be able to filter talent from 1 billion people? Is you have to give back and see what rises. You have to also nurture. Satya Nadella was in India literally a week ago, and he said in a speech that India is spending 2 times more on upskilling people than any other country in the world. 2x more on just upskilling. We recognize that talent is our fundamental strength, and every single organization now invests in upskilling and strengthening. There's a really beautiful saying, Julie, and I think when you come to India, you see this. That saying is that, success and excellence is not one person moving 1,000 steps forward. It's 1,000 people moving 1 step forward. So yes, our growth is small. And I think that's the mistake everyone makes. Everyone looks at GDP growth and they say, oh, the economy and the NASDAQ is moving up in the US and China's GDP is going up, right? But they're going up in small numbers. The African saying is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That saying was from my hometown in Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal. It's called Ubuntu. Means that we exist because you exist. That is the fabric of India.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I think and definitely very relevant for the business world today because it used to be very controlled and you could forecast your situation and you could forecast those 1,000 steps, as you said, in the past. But now things are obviously moving. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily faster, but at least at once. And controlling them all is just not possible. Like in India, you cannot sort of control and forecast what is it going to happen if these amount of people do that. It's more like how as a community can we go that 1 step further. We as and I see that in our work with large companies, the taller the company, the larger the amount of people working there, the more it's struggling. Like how do we keep culture alive? How do we make sure that the values of that company, the purpose of that company stays alive? And I think to your story, I think there's a lot to learn there from how do we get that community in motion and 1 step further, and that is a major result as well. And celebrating that and recognizing that. I think that's a beautiful thing. I hope to learn from India in that sense.
Absolutely. To just give you one example of culture, the thing people don't realize is culture is tested when the chips are down, not when things are going well. So your culture in your organization will come to test when things are going really, really south, and you may not have the resources, you may not have the time, someone may have really messed up. So it's at that moment in time that your culture will truly be tested. And I know a lot of organizations that I advise in India, and just a simple thing like their community service, like the money that they give out, the CSR money. The CSR money that's deployed into charitable organizations, in many organizations in India, it's voted upon by the entire mass of the organization. Like, where should we give it? Because why? Who they're giving the money to is impacting the families of the people that work here. So you don't have a person who's just taking a decision and leaving it like that. They try to bring as many people into as much. They listen. They listen from the ground up. And if you truly want to feel what's happening, that's where you got to listen. You got to keep your ears close to the ground. And you see that in the decisioning making that's happening in many of the companies in India.
Could you maybe elaborate on that upskilling? Are there things in India, like if you'd say the 3 things that are happening that fascinate you the most to make sure that you have that upskilling movement? What are those initiatives?
So one of the big initiatives that we're seeing is Google, for example, are putting internet and computers into almost every single village in India. That was something that started way back. It started close to a decade ago. And that project is constantly going on to make sure that almost every single family has access to an internet and has access to a computer to be able to search things. The second thing that's happening is the translation of all languages right across the board. We're a very, very diverse thing. So you're not going to get information that's available only in a certain language. So the way to upskill, and this is so fundamentally important, we take it for granted in most other countries. But when you got a country that has almost 30 different languages, right, the inability to translate documents in those languages is one of the fundamental blocks in why people are not being upskilled. So being able to translate that and get it going. Then the number of organizations that are just taking kids off the streets and upskilling them in simple skills like how do you code, how do you work, to be able to earn a minimum salary of about $500 a month, 25,000 rupees. That project is moving forward almost every single month. You see thousands of these people. Now you may say, but this is really on the ground. Right. But the point is that it's not just upskilling on the ground. It's raising the entire floor up. And we've seen that. How we've seen that? India a decade ago had more than 770 million people under $1 a day. That number has dropped to about 350 million people. The middle class has grown. Once the middle class has grown, that means they're now way more aware. They have way more disposable income to be able to make more conscious decisions around the food they eat, around where they choose to get educated, account jobs, and we're seeing all of this here. That's coming through. So education, upskilling, all of this is big.
Yeah, I mean, we think of your comment on pressure, and it's where you have pressure and you invite it as an opportunity for leverage. And I think that's exactly what you're describing. I mean, it might seem small, but the pressure that it has today is, the pressure, I would say, the problem is so radical, and you sort of have to take it from there. But the leverage that you can get with working on that at that scale is gigantic. And then it's only getting started. So that indeed, I would say, what's your take on the day after tomorrow of India? Like, if you would say, like, in 10 years, 20 years, I mean, choose whatever time frame you want, but where is India going, according to you?
I mean, India is in a very exciting place. I think what's going to happen in the next 10 years is President Modi over the last 8 years has been very, very cognizant and has been inviting and bringing back a lot of the talent that we lost over the decades before. He's invited them back. The startup ecosystem is absolutely moving forward. I think where we're going to ramp up is we are going to ramp up on the production side. Everyone knows that a lot of countries feel somewhat threatened that a large part of their technology manufacturing is outsourced only to China, So India can become that secondary place where we can ramp up on our technology. The one areas that we're seeing a lot working and India will play catch up on is the use of AI and how can we create automation into our learning systems. Once that kicks in, you're not going to stop India. Why are you not going to stop India? Because we've got 1.4 billion people. The amount of data we get coming in on a day-to-day basis, no other country in the world can get. China's got it, but China's not going to give it to anyone. India's the only country in the world that will share its data once what AI helps us do is now mine that data at a rate that was completely unprecedented previously. So this is why, for that single reason, right, that we're going to have more data being mined to understand more of the world's problems and more of the world's solutions being tested faster than ever before. This is why we're going to be right at the center of the next century.
Yeah, I guess right there and then you answer the question how to solve radical problems and what you can learn from India that way. I think that sort of summarizes it perfectly.
Exactly, yeah.
You met Pascal, our China expert in India last year, I think. I'm not sure whether you read his piece on his reflections, because for us he's really Mr. China, and he has, I think, similar experience to yours, but then with China. And for him it was a really interesting experience also to bridge that to what he's indeed now seeing in India.
I loved his piece. I loved his piece, Judy, when I read it. And I spent a lot of time conversing with him when we were in India. And Pascal's insight, I mean, I could just imagine the India that he saw last December would have been a monumental different, like he landed on another planet, because he came 10 years before that. So 10 years was a long time. So much has changed in terms of infrastructure. I mean, the country completely digitized its economy in that entire time, right down to you could buy street food by paying with a card and digital currency. When a population with 1.4 billion people, it was an absolutely radical thing. I think communicating with Pascal was very interesting because China, where he is such a closed off place that nobody seems to understand it. We look at it as a very, very top down system. The government's dictating to everyone how it used to go. He's in the middle of that. He's seeing growth in that. He's seeing all of that. And then he comes to India, where it's very much a bottoms up approach. Yes, you have the leaders in there, but the leaders are leaders with ears to the ground, who are listening to the vibration and allowing things to sort of emerge and grow from there. It was very, very fascinating to speak to him, and the one positive thing I remember him saying is that, he sees India, being not just, I think a lot of people see India overtaking China in the next year or two, as quick as that in terms of population, even in terms of growth. But what resonated with him was how the moral ethnicity and the moral value code with which it's going to grow and move forward. I think that is something that not too many people write about and not too many people speak about, but that's going to be the subtle differentiator in why its growth will be sustained.
Yeah, that resonates. He also called it sort of the purple ocean, like from a business perspective. And I think that sort of, it makes me think on what you just said, because it's so bottom up. It's sort of from the richness of colors that in India you see that people use it, Correct. People take it and then take the opportunity and go and make sure that it emerges. So it's fascinating to have that as an example, I think. And maybe as one of the final questions, as you know, we are going back, of course, this year. Want to know more and see how this beautiful place in the world can inspire other places in the world and other people, most of all, because I think that's where we started as well. And some standard question that we always get is like, why should we go to place X? Why should we go to India? Because I'm not going to bring my business there. And then we say, but no, it's not a matter of you want to export or you want to have a business there. It's what can you actually learn as a leader today from a place like India? So what would be your top three there?
The top three things that a leader can learn from India. One is you will definitely learn the power of small margins and scale. If you look at a European business, you look at the margins a European business puts on a product, and you look at the margins an Indian business puts on a product, they're two different planets. But if you look at the top line of the company, just on sheer volume, okay, they're doing a significantly higher number. So I think any leader coming in there can understand what does scalability truly mean, and how does one really balance those notional margins that you take for granted into what could be a significant top line and make you really one of the dominant players. That's the first thing. The second one is, it is a country that's rapidly changing and transforming, and you have to embrace multiple cross-cultural diversity in there. I think in Europe and a lot of in the West as well, we are spoiled. We're spoiled because you're not dealing with diverse languages. You're not dealing with diverse cultures. Everybody you hire eats the same food, drinks the same, celebrates the same holidays, likes everything, and it's easy for you. In India, when you have so many people with so much of cultural diversity and religious diversity and language diversity, even a simple thing like picking which holidays to give them in a year is going to become could be quite a difficult task. So the second thing that a leader will learn is, how do you truly create an ecosystem, a platform that embraces diversity in every single shape and form, and because that's one of the key elements to sort of grow. And then my last thing is India really speaks to the heart, Julie. It's really difficult to ignore the plight of the people. It's very difficult. Even if you want to, the people won't let you. Yeah. And I'm not just talking your employees, the society, the community. You can't take a step in the wrong direction without considering the plight of the people and expect to succeed. And I think that empathetic type of leadership is not learned through a Harvard or a Stanford course. It's best learned on the ground. So, if you can do a stint leading something in India, you would learn very quickly how to keep your feet on the ground, keep your ears close to the ground, and listen to the people. Because at the end of the day, those are the people you're serving, and those are the people you're relying on to grow. So these are the top three things. I think anything else you want to, you can learn it from somewhere else. You can learn technology, you can learn automation, you can learn anything else. It's the soft skills that makes a great leader. And in saying that, I think, in my opinion, probably one of the best CEOs in the world at the time, currently, right now, is Satya Nadella at Microsoft. Hands down, one of the best CEOs I've seen. The times he's gone through, how he's taken it personally and the organization. And if you read his book, I recommend every CEO and every person to read Hit Refresh. And you can see how that human connection of growing up in India, being connected to strong values, how he weaved that through that company to Microsoft to become who they are today.
Thanks so much. Really, to finalize that, what I take away from it is really that human element. It's really one of the big differences. It's not only, and again, also not only the technology, only your first point, I think the scalability, the power of scale is there, but that's indeed something we've also been seeing in other places in the world as well. I mean, not at that scale, of course, but we have a lot of companies or leaders coming back from China with a similar experience, but I think those point 2 and 3 really complement that with today's challenges for business leaders. So I think that was very powerful that you made that bridge and maybe that heart and mind line that you said in the beginning. So I would say any last words or advice for leaders today and beyond India, how should they approach the future according to you?
Any last words? I would say, irrespective of where you're building your business, which country, pick one or two companies from India that are legacy companies. Maybe you look at Tata, you look at the Mahindras, you look at Birla as an organization, look at the government, look at the army that's manning the border between Pakistan and India. Just pick them as case studies and study how they operate, study the decision making, study the fabric around which they have to navigate and the diversity. You'll learn a phenomenal amount from just studying that case study. If you get the opportunity to dip your feet into India, that's the best experience that you can get. And I think for leaders looking at moving forward, I think we're moving into a really, really exciting time. We're moving into a time of automation, a time of technology, a time of really, really rapid growth. The one thing that I want to say is that as machine learning and AI kicks in, machines will learn faster than any human possibly can. So the differentiator for you as a person to be able to stay relevant in this new ecosystem is going to be, how can you become more human? We've spent the last 5 decades trying to become more like machines and operate quickly, but now machines are trying to become human. So we have to become more human than that. And that's going to be how you connect to the heart. How do you communicate with emotion? How do you become a better listener? How do you trust? How can you be more empathetic? How can you make sure that the people around you are understood, are heard, are seen, are valued, are respected, and are treated fairly? That's going to be the differentiator. So those are my parting words.
I love them. You only get me more energetic for not only the year to come, but also the future to come. And thanks for your positivity and your focus on, indeed, we live in a wonderful place. Let's keep it that way, and let's only make it more beautiful every single day from the heart and from the head. So thanks again for spending the time with us, and see you very soon in India.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.